This is the GoPro Hero 12, and this is the Osmo Pocket 3. Should you invest in an action camera like this, or invest some extra money and pick up a gimbal stabilizer camera like this? I don't plan on diving deeply into the specs on this one because when you're out in the field actually using these cameras, specs are out the window. For example, the GoPro is a fantastic camera on paper, but I get a little salty when its hyper smooth stabilization is activated in low light. And the Osmo Pocket 3 is also amazing, unless you find yourself in a wet environment, although both cameras are very capable. But a beginner may have a hard time and become very overwhelmed trying to figure out which one of these two cameras is right for them. And that's where the Film Alliance comes in. The goal of this video is to help you drill down which one of these two cameras is best for you depending on what you're shooting. If you leave both of these cameras in program auto exposure, you will only be able to get about 80% use out of them, so it's important you know how to use both cameras to their full potential. If you want an even more in-depth body of information on either camera and how to get the most out of them, I made an entire course on how to set them up, how to use them, and tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. I'll leave links to both courses in the description. I'm going to treat this comparison as more of an actual use case type of video with a heavy emphasis on image quality and usability. I own both of these cameras and this video is not being sponsored by anyone. Oh, and by the way, I uploaded project file video clips from both of these cameras that you can download and view without any YouTube compression, so you can really see the difference in image quality and see how your editing rigs can handle those file sizes. I'll leave a link to those project files in the description. Can you tell the difference between these two shots? And while you try to figure it out, I'll be sharing with you what we will be covering today. Today, we will be comparing the similarities and differences in their low light performance. We will look at their log footage side by side and their native color science when using the normal color profiles. We're going to see how the GoPro's HDR compares to the Osmo Pocket 3's HLG. We're going to throw both into program auto without ND filters in a bright environment. Then we will put ND 64s on both cameras to see how much of the color science is affected by those filters. We're going to measure their body temperatures at different moments in time while we continuously record how much media they both eat up in 4K 60 along with their battery usage. We will compare their autofocus systems, their stabilization when hand-holding both cameras, whether the GoPro's digital horizon lock is better than the mechanical horizon lock on the Osmo Pocket 3. We will be looking at their vlog framing, listen to their native audio, film in their vertical aspect ratio for people who like to do social media. We'll film in 1080-240 for super slow motion. We'll check out both cameras' wide angle functions. We will get some actual product shots, as if you were a YouTuber and one of these were your only camera. We'll do some green screen work to see which one delivers a better looking key, do some photography, test out their dynamic range. We're gonna compare their playback functionality and usability. We will be talking about which one of these two cameras is for whom, and do a ton of side-by-side image comparisons all along the way. Coming at this comparison as a beginner would, I shot a lot in program auto exposure for most of the outdoor shots with both cameras, and just let the cameras do their thing straight out of camera. I also went manual exposure for some advanced users for shots that required a little bit extra exposure control. Alright, we have a lot to cover in a little bit of time, and I'd love for you to tell me which one of these two cameras you like better. That's what we're covering today on the Film Alliance. If by the end of this video you're still undecided on which one of these two cameras is best for you, I made a free camera quiz that may help you get on the right track, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. Right out of the gate, when I'm shooting in video and photo, I do notice that I get the best results when I underexpose just a tad. Both bodies have different designs and ways of holding the cameras. The Osmo Pocket 3 is more of a conspicuous camera than the GoPro. And the reason why this is important is because last weekend I was out filming with both cameras in a crowded environment. And a security guard came up to me and told me I couldn't film on the property. Can you guess which camera I had in my hand when they came up to me? The GoPro. I've never been confronted filming with the Osmo Pocket 3, at least as of yet. I don't think security guards know what this is. Before we talk about user experience and image quality with both of these cameras, let's talk about some of the specs, their prices, and when they were released. The GoPro Hero 12 has a 27 megapixel sensor that can shoot in 10-bit up to 5.3K 60 frames per second and 4K up to 120 frames per second. It can shoot in log and it weighs 5.4 ounces. It comes with a fixed lens with multiple focal lengths and has mind-blowing stabilization. And it starts at $349 US. The Osmo Pocket 3 has a 9 megapixel sensor and it can shoot in 4K up to 120 and 1080 up to 240. It can shoot in D-Log-M and weighs 6.3 ounces. It's a fixed lens camera with mechanical stabilization and it starts at $519 US. When we talked about the different weights, I mentioned that the Osmo Pocket 3 is about 1 ounce heavier than the GoPro, but once you put that protective case on the GoPro, they're about the same weight, or at least they feel that way. The GoPro is more robust than the Osmo Pocket 3, and there's no moving parts with the GoPro, whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 has a gimbal head, and I assume if you drop this thing and it lands the wrong way, it could easily break. But with that being said, I have dropped my Osmo Pocket 3 twice from about waist height, and I haven't had any issues with it breaking. But the irony of this is, I did crack my GoPro display without even dropping it. It was in my camera bag, it was in a nice little spot inside my bag, and it developed a hairline crack on the display, which is why I recommend you pick up a protective case to protect it from having a display crack or developing cracks and scuffs on the outside. The problem with the GoPro protective case is that you cannot change the settings through the plastic on the back of the display. So if you want to change the settings, you'll have to pull the GoPro out, which becomes a problem especially if you're in a wet environment. So there's a fine line between keeping it in a case and keeping it out of a case. Both cameras have a single card slot for their micro SD cards. They can use the same micro SD cards, and they both only have 2 buttons on the outside of their body. Well, the Osmo Pocket 3 does have a joystick, which also acts as a button and for your pan and tilt, along with your power button and your record button. And the GoPro has a mode button on the side and a record button on the top. And the mode button is what you use to power on and off the GoPro. The big difference between these two cameras is that you can remove and replace the battery out of the GoPro, where you have to recharge the Osmo Pocket 3 from the USB-C port because it only has an internal battery. Another big difference is the display on the GoPro is much bigger than the Osmo Pocket 3, which means you won't only be able to frame your shots better and be able to better expose your image, but you'll also have a better playback experience. Speaking about playback, when you're playing both cameras back from within the display, you can scrub along the timeline through longer videos. And with the GoPro, you can mark the good spots because there's a little marker icon that you like, little highlight spot. Whereas with the Osmo Pocket 3, you'll have to try to remember which clip you like the best. You can press the little heart button, which will save the clip, but the GoPro can save an actual spot on the clip that you like better. One more thing is while you're recording with both of these cameras is you cannot pause the video while you're recording, which is something I know some people have been asking about for a while in the comments, so I thought that was worth mentioning. If you are a vlogger, the GoPro has a front-facing screen so you can make sure you're framed up correctly. Just make sure you turn this screen off when you're using it because it will burn up the battery faster. The Osmo Pocket 3 camera rotates 180 degrees to face you, so you can still see the display and make sure you're framed up correctly. A big difference on both of these cameras when it comes to vlogging is the Osmo Pocket 3 has something called Face Auto Detect, which will lock onto your face and keep your face framed up so you can focus on what you're talking about to the camera, whereas the GoPro, you'll have to make sure that you're framed up right and at the same time remember what you're trying to say to the camera. If you do use Auto Face Detect with the Osmo Pocket 3, you will burn up the battery faster, so just be aware of that. We're gonna get into photography later in this video, but the Osmo Pocket 3 can do something the GoPro cannot do, and that is shoot panoramic shots. It does it all from within the camera and seams the pictures together right there in the camera so you can export panoramic shots as they are. The GoPro has different framing modes and has the ability to shoot in that horizontal orientation 16:9, the vertical orientation 9:16, and the full aspect ratio 8:7, which uses the entire sensor of the GoPro. The Osmo Pocket 3 can shoot in horizontal aspect ratio 16:9 and vertical 9:16. However, if you're shooting in 4K, when you switch the Osmo Pocket 3 over to vertical shooting, it'll downgrade to a resolution of 3K. If you do flip the GoPro on its side like this, and then you turn it on, you can shoot in 4K, but then you lose out on that conspicuous shooting mode. You can shoot in vertical with the GoPro while you're still holding it horizontal like this, which is nice because it has a quarter mount thread on the bottom. So if you're a social media vertical shooter, you can hook the GoPro up to a tripod and still have it film vertical in its aspect ratio. I used both cameras as green screen cameras and they both performed great. I didn't notice too much of a difference between both shots after I keyed out my green screen, but the Osmo Pocket 3 does have a 1-inch CMOS sensor, which is bigger than the GoPro's sensor, and it showed here in these tests. I would use either of these cameras for green screen cameras, but if I had to make a choice, I would go with the Osmo Pocket 3. I also use both of these cameras as an overhead product shot, as if they were my only cameras that I owned. But the only thing that I could really tell the difference on was the focal length. You could really tell that wide fisheye look with the GoPro, even when I was shooting with the linear lens that comes inside the GoPro, compared to the Osmo Pocket 3. I ended up having to move the Osmo Pocket 3 down a little bit to try to get the framing to match up to the GoPro. But other than that, I think both product shots looked great, and I would not be opposed to using either of these cameras as my overhead cameras. I did notice that when I was shooting in 1080-240, the Osmo Pocket 3 tended to be a little bit sharper, but both of them did not have the greatest look, and I would be careful about using 1080-240 in anything other than well-lit environments. I wouldn't even use 1080-240 if it was overcast out. I did do a couple of shots of 1080-240 with overcast skies, and I noticed that the edges of the subject were really falling apart, and those darks were really falling apart. Thankfully for the GoPro, you can shoot in 2.7K up to 240. And then I was seeing a lot better of an image quality than I was seeing with the 1080-240 out of the Osmo Pocket 3. So if I wanted to shoot in 240 frames per second, then I would go with the GoPro because you can shoot in 2.7K. When it came to testing out both cameras' color profiles, I liked the way the Osmo Pocket 3's color looked better. It had more of a filmic look, and the GoPro looked more digital to my eyes. And when it comes to shooting in log with the GoPro and the Osmo Pocket 3's D-Log, I didn't notice that much of a difference when I went to color grade in post-production. Both cameras have a very high image quality, so they're easy to color grade and adjust the colors to how you like. The GoPro has two different options for its digital electronic stabilization. You can either go hyper smooth or auto boost. Hyper smooth is generally good enough, and I didn't really see that much of a difference between hyper smooth and auto boost. But the GoPro manual says to use auto boost for fast moving action shots, which gives it a little bit more stabilization. Because hyper smooth is an electronic stabilization, you are not going to want to use this in low light situations, mainly due to the fact that it has limitations on the sensor and the processing power available. In low light, the camera may struggle to capture enough detail to effectively stabilize the footage, leading to a reduced performance. Additionally, the stabilization algorithm may prioritize preserving image quality over stabilization in low light, resulting in less effective stabilization. This, my friend, is why the mechanical stabilization inside of the Osmo Pocket 3 far outweighs the digital electronic stabilization out of the GoPro. I would say mainly in low light situations. Now, when we went outside in bright sunlight and we were just walking along, filming both underexposed a tad, there wasn't that much of a difference between stabilization, between the smoothest on stabilization. But when I put it into below light, that's when the Osmo Pocket 3 really performed better. If you're in a bright environment, then the GoPro will work out just fine. But it does have another feature that's pretty cool, and that's called horizon lock. This locks the horizon straight to make it look as if you are on a gimbal. Even if you are rotating the GoPro a little bit, it'll maintain that horizon. So I really appreciated that, mainly when I was out in bright sunlight. Both cameras do well with low light, but not above ISO 800. Once I traveled up into the 1600 range for ISO with both of these cameras, you really started to see the noise come out. This is where the bigger sensor on the Osmo Pocket 3 really overshined the GoPro, especially at that ISO 1600. Although it was pretty noisy, I wouldn't use the footage out of the GoPro, where I was probably get away with the 1600 on the Osmo Pocket 3. It's especially noticeable when we film lights at night and you can see the bleeding of the light into the pixels and into the shadows. Some people like this effect because it makes it look more cinematic, or as if you were to put a filter on. But I prefer to have nice clean lines, especially when I'm shooting in low light. If you don't know what ISO is, when a camera's ISO setting is increased, the sensor becomes more sensitive to light, which can result in a brighter image. However, this increased sensitivity also leads to more electronic noise in the image. The noise appears as random variations in brightness and color, and it can degrade the overall image quality. So the higher ISO setting that you go on either of these cameras, the more noise you will have. This is why images captured at higher ISOs tend to have more visible noise. I go into great detail on low light shooting with both of these cameras in my courses, but that's just a basic overview. I'd say as long as you keep your ISO set to 800 or below, then my shots were looking pretty good, and if I needed more brightness to my image, I would either introduce more light or I would wait for the sun to come out. I'm of the mindset that I would prefer to not go out and do a bunch of low light shooting at ISO 1600 with the GoPro and come home to a bunch of useless footage. I would say it's better to just not record and wait for more light to come, or I'll just go and find a different location. Well, I always say that, but then I end up cranking the ISO because it looks so good in my display, and then I'll come home and see that it's too noisy, and I say, dang, I did it again. If you're into shooting time lapses, then both cameras do great. They're easy to use, quick to set up, and they produce great looking images. The one difference between the two is that the Osmo Pocket 3 has something called motion lapse, where you can set a waypoint where you want the Osmo Pocket 3 to start and then finish at the end of the time lapse, giving your time lapse movement. If you wanted to do this with the GoPro, you would have to do it in post-production and scale in a bit so that you could make your frame move left and right or up and down, or just scale in. But the GoPro does have something called time warp, which allows the stabilization inside of the GoPro to be activated while you're doing a time lapse. And you could put this onto moving things like a bike, a helmet, a scooter on the top of your car, and it makes for a pretty cool effect. The Osmo Pocket 3 has something similar called hyperlapse, and this is in my opinion better because you can actually lock onto a subject while you move the camera, almost like a parallax effect. The ability for the Osmo Pocket 3 to lock onto subjects is also great for product video. You can do some really cool product shots if you lock onto a subject and then you parallax around it so the camera stays locked on to the subject. Whereas with the GoPro, you would have to manually try to get the subject in the center of the frame, and as you curve around, try to keep that thing framed up in the center. It makes it a little bit more difficult. The fact that you can lock onto subject is also great for people who like to film by themselves, because you can set the Osmo Pocket 3 up on a tripod and have it track you as if someone's actually filming you. Another cool mode that the Osmo Pocket 3 has is something called dynamic framing. This is where you can have the Osmo Pocket 3 lock onto a subject in 9 different spots of the frame, and then it keeps it there while you move the camera. The reason I like to do this is because then you're not locked onto something right in the center of the frame. You can put it anywhere in the frame. This is why when it comes to modes, the Osmo Pocket 3 blows the GoPro out of the water, because when it comes to shooting in different modes, the gimbal will lock onto things, whereas the GoPro, you're stuck with what you got on the fixed lens. One more mode the Osmo Pocket 3 can do that the GoPro cannot do is a spin shot. Now, you can only go 180 degrees with the spin shot, but it's still pretty cool effect if you're looking for that inception effect. For these tests, I kept both cameras at the ambient room temperature, which started off at 76 degrees. I turned the front-facing screen on the GoPro to off, and I switched to program auto exposure on both cameras, and I turned the resolution and frame rate to 4K 60. You can really start to see a difference even at the 5-minute mark. The GoPro heated up 8 degrees hotter than the Osmo Pocket 3. At the 20-minute mark, we were 17 degrees hotter than the OP3, and then eventually at the 31-minute mark, the GoPro shut down. This is something that I would be aware of, especially if you're a live streamer or someone who wants to take longer shots, or you're outside in the sun. Another thing to remember is that protective case that you put on the GoPro will probably take those times down even farther because the heat would not be able to dissipate as fast as it needs. Up until now, I have not been able to get the Osmo Pocket 3 to overheat in all of the tests that I've done, and I've shot long takes over an hour. The Osmo Pocket 3 absolutely wins in the overheating test, and the GoPro overheated for me at 4K 60 in 31 minutes. When we jumped down into the media storage use test, a funny thing occurred. I'm not sure exactly why, maybe you know and you can leave it in the comments. On an empty 64GB card, setting up both cameras to shoot in 4K 24, both cameras had a very similar amount of filming time. An hour and 34 minutes for the Osmo Pocket 3, and the GoPro Hero 12 had an hour and 36 minutes. But once I switched both cameras over to 4K 60, the Osmo Pocket 3 had 10 more minutes worth of recording time than the GoPro. Now I know this has something to do with the bitrate and the processing power, and I did have the bitrate to high and the bit depth to 10-bit on the GoPro, but I did not expect to see this much of a difference with 4K 60 for the media storage used. Also, for that 31-minute clip before the GoPro overheated, that was 6 gigabytes bigger than the Osmo Pocket 3's files. So when it comes to media storage use, the Osmo Pocket 3 wins by quite a bit. 10 minutes may not seem like a lot to you, but it is when you're out in the field and you're sweating because you don't have a lot of time left on your SD card and you know it's burning up fast. And then finally, the next one down was battery exhaust test. We only used 28% of our battery with the Osmo Pocket 3 compared to 53% of the battery on the GoPro Hero 12. That's a pretty substantial difference, but an even bigger difference is the time that it took to charge both cameras 0 to 100%. I always tell people how impressed I am with the Osmo Pocket 3, how it can charge so fast. It can charge from 0 to 100% in 21 minutes only when you hook it up to a USB-C charger, whereas the GoPro takes over 3 hours to charge 0 to 100%. In all three of these tests, the Osmo Pocket 3 blows the GoPro out of the water, but if you were to get a GoPro, then I would just recommend picking up some extra batteries as accessories. Also, don't forget that although the Osmo Pocket 3 wins when it comes to these tests, it still cannot go underwater and do things that the GoPro can do, like shoot in 5.3K. So there are trade-offs between both of these cameras, but I wanted to run those tests in case any of them are pertinent to what you are doing content creation-wise. When filming with the GoPro, the display turns black after about a minute, whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 display stays lit. The only time you can turn the display off during recording with the Osmo Pocket 3 is in its time-lapse mode by pressing the little moon icon that appears in the upper left-hand corner. Because the display on the Osmo Pocket 3 stays on longer, the battery will drain faster, but not as fast as the GoPro's. For these tests, I left the front-facing screen on the GoPro turned off. You can leave the display on the GoPro, but you'll have to configure that through the preferences and the settings on the GoPro. The point is that you have the option to sleep the display with the GoPro, whereas you don't with the Osmo Pocket 3, unless you're in time-lapse mode. The field of view on the GoPro is pretty wide, and it even has an option to go hyper wide or hyper view. And when I compared hyper view on the GoPro to putting the wide lens on the Osmo Pocket 3, the hyper view to me on the GoPro almost looked too fisheye for my liking. Whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 had a tad bit of fisheye in the outsides, but I did like that look a little bit better. The Osmo Pocket 3 has a different focus system, whereas the GoPro stays pretty much focused on everything. I can set the Osmo Pocket 3 to single focus, which acts as almost like a manual focus to get some good cinematic looking type shots in the foreground and the background. You can also blur out the background if you have your subject close enough to the lens. The Pocket 3 also comes with product showcase mode, which means you can hold something out in front of the camera and it will automatically lock on the subject and unlock off of your face. The GoPro does not give you as many creative options with its focus systems. In fact, it doesn't really give you any options at all. It pretty much keeps everything in focus all the time. Even for the autofocus tests that I did with both these cameras, you don't really tell the difference with the GoPro. But this may be something that you like better, because then everything will be in focus and you don't have to worry about it. It's just one less thing that you have to worry about. And that's one of the great things about action cameras. Everything is pretty much in focus. You can operate these cameras remotely through the apps GoPro and DJI, providing you the ease of use when you're in hard to reach spots. If your GoPro is on a helmet and you can't see it, that would be a good time to use the app. If the Osmo Pocket 3 is on the ground and you can't see the display, that would be a good time to use the app. Or if you have the GoPro in the case and it's all wet and you don't want to open it up and change the settings. The vlog framing and native audio out of both of these cameras is okay, but you can take a look here. All right, vlog shot tests, also listening to the audio on the Pocket 3 here. We want to see not only what it looks like as far as colors go, we're in the normal color space, but also what that native audio sounds like. I'm keeping my hand off of those 3 mic holes. All right, let's take a listen to that GoPro and see how good it is for vlogging. Okay, so here we are vlogging with the GoPro Hero 12. I want to see what those colors look like, but more importantly, I want to see what that sound sounds like, or I should say hear what that sound sounds like with the native mic out of the GoPro compared to the Pocket 3. You can be the judge on which one you thought had a better frame for vlogging and which one sounded better audio-wise. But the Osmo Pocket 3 does have the ability to connect to the DJI mic too, which will wirelessly transmit your audio right to the receiver that's built within the Osmo Pocket 3, and that will produce way better audio. I almost forgot to include photography in this, and I know there's a lot of photographers out there who would like to shoot photography with both of these cameras. And after shooting extensively with both cameras, specifically in photo mode, I would say the GoPro has a cleaner image, mainly because of its higher megapixels. But the Osmo Pocket 3 still has a bigger sensor, so your images will look great. But I do think you need to underexpose both cameras by -1 to get the best looking image. This way your highlights won't be blown out, but you'll still be able to preserve the shadows at the same time. I like using the photo profiles inside of the GoPro to give my images more of a flair. If you were to say to me, Joe, I am in the market to pick up an action camera like this and a portable gimbal camera like this, then I would say pick up the Osmo Pocket 3 and the Osmo Action 4. No need to pick up the GoPro because the Osmo Action 4 does pretty much everything that the GoPro does, and your colors will match up better. But if you're only picking up one of these cameras, then you'll have to ask yourself, what are you shooting? If you can answer that question, then you should be able to figure out which one of these two cameras is best for you. If you wanted to mount either of these cameras onto a helmet or the top of a car, then the GoPro would be the way to go. Especially when you have such cheap accessories on Amazon, which kind of give you every creative option you could ask for. You can mount the Osmo Pocket 3 onto different accessories, but it's not as easy or portable as the GoPro. DJI does sell an accessory to attach the Osmo Pocket 3 to the same accessories that you can hook up the GoPro to, but still it's got a moving head, and the Pocket 3 just would have vibrations and jitters in your footage, unlike the GoPro. I am of the mindset that I think it's always great to have an action camera inside of your bag, because you never know when you might need it. What if you're shooting with your Osmo Pocket 3 and it starts to rain? You can pull out your action camera. Then after the rain goes away, you can pull your Osmo Pocket 3 back out and enjoy that better battery life, a cinematic look, higher dynamic range, and better image quality. So that's my comparison on both of these cameras and what I like and what I don't like about them. I think that they're created for different users depending on what you're doing. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have either of these cameras and you haven't taken my course yet, take a look at it to see if it's something that you may be interested in. I'll leave a link to those courses in the description. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. Thanks for watching. Have a nice week.